All right, I'm starting to record. Um, I have the chat box open here. You see that? So anytime, feel free to jump in or um, you know, raise your hand or chat. We don't need to be totally quiet here tonight. Um, I just wanted to do a little wrap up. Hopefully, it won't be much more than about a half an hour. Uh, and also just check and see if there's any further information you need on the course before we end up. Uh, Kind of some final thoughts I wanted to share with you about. A big part of this course what was really a process, uh, and I think a good process for beginning to identify and develop skills that you have, and I believe leadership skills. And I think we, I think maybe hopefully you've seen the importance of reflection. And I think reflection is really critical. Hopefully, you found that in the U Ink paper during the process of writing it and analyzing yourself that way. And usually, it's not an opportunity we get to do much of, but self-reflection is a pretty critical um, area to develop in terms of building your own set of skills. Some of the most successful, almost every successful leader I've talked to talks about the importance of self awareness. And as you know, that's the number one skill area. I think another thing I hope to accomplish was to increase or enhance some of your perspectives on things, or for help you develop conceptual versatility, a lot more ways to look at different things. And if we go back to the first class, probably my biggest message in my mind is the importance of appreciating difference as opposed to setting up distinctions between us. And being able to appreciate difference will enable us to interact uh, in a more effective manner with each other. What I like about each of the chapters and when we did each of the skills, I think it gives a nice structured way to a review, or if you're trying to, it gives you a structured way to begin to take apart and analyzing a skill you have or want to develop. Uh, there's a framework for it. And I think the best framework is that notion of learning about it cognitively, being able to practice it, uh, and being able to implement it. The That contract we gave you for doing your skill development, I think it's a good thing to hang on to because that contract, the way we set that up, those are the things I think the categories or areas to look at if you're trying to improve. Kind of that in general was what I was hoping we were going to accomplish in this class. It's a little different, I think, than how you may have covered this material in the past. I absolutely firmly believe that your success in your careers, especially if you're in a corporation or running your own business, these skills we talked about in here are absolutely vital for your continued success. And so, as I said to many of you in your papers, I think it would be a good idea to read your papers in 4 or 5 years and see where you're at. I think you'll find that there isn't much different, you would say. Um, Anyone have any? I'm going to end tonight by talking about some thoughts on happiness. Almost everyone in your Ewing papers use the word happiness when talking about mission or vision or values, this general concept of happiness. And for us Americans, we believe in the age-old statement on our Declaration of Independence and of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I don't know if you think much about happiness, but there's been an awful lot of research on happiness. So I thought I would end by talking a little bit about this. But before I do, does anyone have anything they want to say about the course right now, or any questions? Who can I put on the spot?
Just like about the course in general, or?
In general, or any thoughts you had on it?
I have one thought that actually I would probably put in my course evaluation, but why not while we're here?
Okay.
Just that with the contracts and setting goals, when I was setting my goals, I thought, man, one goal that I would love to accomplish is really to work on conflict resolution
Yeah.
and dealing with conflict. And I kind of, I don't know, assumed that maybe a lot of people would have that because nobody really likes conflict. I don't know.
Right.
But having that chapter and that be one of the last things, I feel like, I don't know, maybe I would have liked that unit a little bit earlier so I could have had time to reflect on it before creating my goals.
Okay.
I don't know, that's just one thought.
That's well taken. Sometimes I like to cover that earlier with when we're covering power. And it's too bad we had all that snow on Saturday
Yeah, you're telling me.
with that. Any other thoughts people have? Want to share? Either enhance and you, Haley, put that in the valuation.
Yeah, we'll do, for sure.
One of the problems that we're finding with the 8-week class is when we did this course over 14, 15 weeks, there was we were able to cover more of the material, and so people had more time for that reflection you were talking about. So and to the point you raised, I'm thinking the next time I do this, I might spend a little more time up front talking a little bit more about some of the skills we're going to be covering throughout the semester to help people maybe identify some things they'd want to work on early. So that's a good suggestion you have. We just may have to cover it a little differently. Anything else? Mark or Dennis? Nora, you with us? Rodolfo?
Yeah, I mean, I'll chime in. As I was going through my skill contracts too, mine were just a little tough because there are actually some things going on in work in the future. But then when I thought of the actual skills that were going on with them, it was things that I could work on, day in and day out. But yeah, I mean, it was just very relevant, the information. I mean, there were a number of times in both class and work where I saw the two parallel really nicely. And I think that you made a good point here as we began, things you don't really think of, like, for instance, happiness or conflict resolution, things I don't ever really verbalize, both in professional and personal life. So I think it did a nice job of bringing it to light. When I looked through the syllabus as I was going through some of the papers, I mean, I think we really did hit on a pretty wide range of subjects in a short amount of time. That is kind of, for me personally, a good place to start as I, wrote these contracts, did my Ewing paper, and then as I kind of progressed throughout. So,
okay. Thanks, Dennis.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else before I talk about happiness? Go ahead.
I just want to say I thought the class was very relevant to to today's world and what you have to experience in business to be a leader and to be a manager. So I thought it really hit on a lot of key points that were important, and you definitely do need this skill set to advance in your career nowadays, probably more now than ever. I think it is difficult in an 8-week class to be able to fit all this kind of things in, especially when you're doing the skills. You know, we had really 3 weeks to kind of write the paper about instead of
Right.
the 8 weeks it would have been if we were to have this class in a 16-week class instead. But I think overall it was a great class and very relevant.
But I think at least the skill development
Hello,
put you on a path. Yes. Who did I cut off there?
this is Rodolfo.
Okay. Hi, Rodolfo.
Yeah. Hi. I agree with the Mark comments. If we see that in the professional point of view and opportunities to grow inside a company, I totally agree. But I would like to add also that this is well used also in a personal point of view to, for example, increase your relationship or make your personal relationship better or your friends relationship better. That's I think the additional value to me for the class, not only help me to grow and in some way open some professional opportunities, but also personally get better.
All right. Thanks, Rodolfo. And Annie, thanks for your comments. There are a couple more courses similar to this. There's a summer weekend course that Steve Meisel teaches that it's really a pretty intensive workshop if you're interested. It goes Saturday and Sunday all day for 2 weekends. One of the Jim Smither, one of the faculty members, I know some of you are in his class, has done a lot of work on happiness. Happiness is something that that I have think about a lot and read about a lot. And so Jim and I share a lot of information back and forth. So let me just share some of my thoughts on happiness with you. Whoops. Who is happy? There's a Thomas Sawyer says happiness is an imaginary condition, for me attributed by the living to the dead, now usually attributed by adults to children and by children to adults. Interesting. I said money can't buy friends, but you can get a lot better class of enemy, which probably makes some sense. And here's an interesting one. I've now reigned about 50 years in victory and peace, beloved by my subjects, dreaded by my enemies, and respected by my allies. Riches and honors, power and pleasure have waited on my call. Nor does any earthly blessing appear to be wanting for my felicity. In this situation, I have diligently numbered the days of pure and genuine happiness which have fallen to my lot. They amount to 14. So this, I thought that was an interesting quote. There's a fair amount of research on this. A lot of people, majority fall in the positive range of happiness. 84% of Americans see themselves either as very happy or pretty happy. And 86% of 43 nations had average happiness levels above the midpoint. So happiness, I guess in America maybe would tend to be a happy lot, but it does change. So when you look at measuring happiness, psychologists use the word subjective well-being, SWB. And so how satisfied are you with your life these days are the kinds of questions that are asked. And those who describe themselves as happy also seem happy to their friends and family. And also, though, compared with depressed people, happy people are less self-focused, less hostile, less abusive, less vulnerable. They're more loving, forgiving, trusting, energetic. Positive well-being or happiness is not merely the absence of negative feelings. So there are some drivers of happiness. First, I want to talk about a couple myths. By the way, if you want to jump in, please do at any point with any thoughts you have. Do you think happiness is related to age? Am I happier than you guys being older? Or are younger people happier than older people? In the 1980s survey of many people in a lot of nations, knowing somebody's age gave no indication about what their sense of happiness would be. People do face crisis, but not predictable. There really isn't such thing as a midlife crisis or an empty nest syndrome. Life gets better as one ages in one's perception. Older Americans were the happiest, believe it or not. And the odds of being happy increased 5% with every 10 years of age. So that's something to look forward to. You may be happy. And about 33% of Americans reported being very happy at the age of 88 versus about 24% of people in their early 20s. 75% of the people age 57 to 85 engage in one or more as social activities at least once a week. Socializing, religious services, volunteering. And those people in their 80s are as likely, or twice as likely as those in their 50s to do these activities. This comes later because there is a relationship between happiness and engaging in social activities. Does happiness, so age, does happiness have a favorite sex? Do you think men are happier than women? Anyone have thoughts on that? Or do you think it's going to be about the same?
I think it's about the same.
All right. Men are 5 times as vulnerable as women to alcoholism and antisocial personality disorder. But women are twice as vulnerable as men to disabling depression and anxiety. So these are some studies. The net result is roughly equally hedonistic balance, happiness for men and women. So over studies done around the world, the gender accounted for less than 1% of people's well-being. How about knowing your race or ethnic group? Gives little clue to a person's happiness. So there's not necessarily one race or ethnic group that's happier than another. It's like men and women. What about culture? Some of the nations do differ strikingly in happiness. So we do find some nations, people report that they're very happy, the percentage of people. But this has some other variables that may cause that. Satisfaction with one's country is positively related to individual happiness. the relationship is especially strong where life conditions are difficult. So your own individual level of happiness relates to your country's overall. Does money buy happiness? About 75% of entering collegians declared that an essential or very important life goal was being well off financially. Interesting, this is nearly double the roughly 40% who said the same thing in 1970. This goal of being off well financially exceeded the importance of helping others in difficulty, becoming a commuting leader, or a meaningful philosophy of life. So, and it was equal in importance with raising a family. So, is it going to bring happiness? Most adults share this materialism and believe that increased income would make them happier. But however, national wealth is confounded with other variables such as, you know what, this slide got, I'm sorry about this, slide got mixed in about the countries. National wealth or people's feelings about wealth is related to democracy or happiness. Okay. That we're in terms of dealing with this money, we're looking at it from also the point of view of, are people in richer countries happier than those in poorer countries? And its national wealth is a confound, like democracy might be a main reason for happiness and not wealth. Also, social support in the country or religion might be a cause of happiness rather than the wealth. Social support is positively related to life satisfaction at the national level, but religion necessarily wasn't. One study asked Americans, so within a country, are richer people happier? Asked 315 Americans to rank their happiness and to predict how happy they would be if they made 10 different incomes. Those who reported earning $25,000 a year said their happiness would double if they were making 55. But in the actual study, their happiness didn't double, only went up 7% with the increase in salary. Are rich individuals the happiest? Having food, shelter, and safety is basic, but once you have life's necessities, increasing your affluence tends to matter very little. The correlation between income and happiness is very small. It's positive, but small. But once people reach the median income, the happiness return is very small. Beyond the household income of $75,000 a year, now this is neat. Money does nothing for happiness, enjoyment, sadness, or stress. So it's almost like there's a level, a set point for money, that beyond that it doesn't do a lot for happiness. Satisfaction with income, not your actual income, predicts happiness. It predicts it more than the actual. On one survey, people on the Forbes list of wealthiest reported only slightly greater happiness than other Americans. So consumer research has found that materialism, the importance we place on wealth and possessions, is negatively correlated with happiness and self-esteem, and correlated with self-criticism. Some studies have found the relative importance of the goal of financial success was negatively associated with happiness and positively correlated with depression, anxiety, and behavioral disorders. Remember what I said in an earlier slide that many collegians today are ranking financial success probably the highest, up there with family. The negative impact of the goal for financial success on happiness diminishes as income increases. The stronger the goal for financial success, the lower the satisfaction with family life, regardless of income. Here we're talking about this as a goal. So there's another big issue with dealing with money is income inequality. Some data, survey data from between 72 and 2008, Americans were on average happier in the years with less national income inequality than in the years with more. And it has to do with the fairness of how people think that situation is. And then finally, as we become more affluent, do we become happier? In America, in 57, per person income expressed in today's dollars was less than 8,000. Today, I'm not sure what today is, 16. We have twice as many cars, microwave ovens, color TVs, air conditioners, and $12 billion worth of brand new name athletic shoes a year. So are we happier than in 1957? And it is that in 1993, this is between 57 and 93, we were actually less happy on some of the scales. So compared with life 77, our homes are bigger, we live longer, we're crammed with more things, but we're happiness stuck. Data suggests that economic growth in affluent countries gives little boost to human morale. In sum, over the past 25 years, the world as a whole has experienced exceptional economic growth, widespread democratization, and increasing tolerance of social diversity. These changes expanded freedom of choice, which in turn led to rising levels of happiness. Before we move on, what are some of your thoughts on money? I know I went quickly through that, but there's a ton of studies in a number of different countries about affluence and happiness. My sense is that once you reach a point of having enough money to get by, or not just get by, but you reach a point of having enough that having more and more doesn't add to your happiness necessarily. Any thoughts? That's why they call it a myth. We tend the rational thing would be the more money we have, the happier we are. Not necessarily true. Anyone have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I have a thought. Yeah, I think this is a really interesting topic. I've been interested in happiness for a long time, and I actually studied Buddhism with a monk for a year in the south of Holland. And there people were coming from all over the world, and not many people were actually from Holland, which is interesting because it's known to be a very happy country. So people who came to the monastery were generally unhappy, and they were looking for happiness.
Okay.
And kind of what Buddhism teaches you is to not look outside of yourself, to try and reach a happy state or reach contentment, but to look inside yourself. And I think this is interesting because, like, studies tend to look at least in business, a lot of external factors. And I mean, certainly there's a lot of research on internal factors as well, but I guess in terms of striving for happiness, I still feel like the focus tends to be so external. I mean, yeah, like culture and our value system and our income plays a role.
Right.
But isn't that all related to internal stuff? I don't know.
Oh, well, I might tend to agree with you as we go along and looking at some of these things, because maybe that's why happiness doesn't increase is as the external stuff increases. You know, like concepts like freedom, democracy, all those things are related to internals. That's a good distinction. Anyone else?
My thing with happiness has always been, I guess because I come from a pretty big family, is like just the people I surround myself with. And I feel like it's been even more so within the past year or two with some of the relationships I've made. I mean, I'd be remiss to say if I, income and trying to better myself through this education and climb up that ladder. I mean, I would like to make a good living, but I think it is all relative. And I don't know what that point is where, when do you stop saying more and more and more and just kind of relax and enjoy? But I think, I've seen cases where if people continue to try to just take and make as much as they can, and then they really lose that other part of it. And then it's kind of begs the question, what's it all worth? So I think it's finding that equal balance between the two, that I think is obviously different for every person, but I always try to do the people I surround myself with and the relationships, and then kind of supplement that with working hard and trying to, do the best I can there. So.
I think that's all a question we have. As I read I certainly got from all of you, you're looking for a lot more than life than just pure financial security. There's some interesting studies on giving and receiving. Talk about those that, people rated their happiness, and they reported on their income and how much they spend on personal spending for themselves and what they call pro-social spending. I'm learning all these new words. Pro-social is you spend on others or gifts or of time. Personal spending was unrelated to happiness, but pro-social spending was positively related to it. I don't know if this is getting a little bit at the internal dimension, but what about pro-social spending that's totally anonymous? Do people feel happy? The question I would have: do people feel happy if no one knows about their giving? Charitable giving in 136 countries. Again, there was a positive relationship between giving and happiness. By the way, on the website for I opened it up for tonight's class, the last module. There's and if you're interested, there's a much larger, about 260 slides on happiness, with a lot of references. So if you're interested in looking further into some of these questions. So it looks like this giving has a much better reward than receiving in research, anyway. So a summary on the myths of happiness is the general conclusion from almost a century of research on the determinants of well-being is that objective circumstances, demographic variables, and life events are correlated with happiness less strongly than intuition and everyday experience tell us they ought to be. So, Haley, this may be right in your point that, yeah, a lot of studies are external, but a lot of the things we're looking at don't seem to account for a great number of variations in happiness. Happiness is enhanced when people's goals are intrinsic, feasible, valued by one's culture, and not conflicting. This is one approach that's looking at happiness, that people are relatively happier when they choose to pursue success rather than avoid failure, are committed to goals and believe they're making progress. Happy people tend to be less sensitive to social comparison than are unhappy people. Do you tend to, you've probably run into a lot of people like this that compare themselves to each other, and that notion of keeping up with the Joneses. Unhappy people tend to be deflated rather than delighted about a colleague's accomplishments. How do you feel if someone does worse than you on exams? Does it make you feel better to do better than somebody else? Unhappy students reported feeling happier and more self-confident when they received a poor evaluation, but heard that a peer received an even worse one. So, just some interesting things. Unhappy people hold themselves culpable for their team's losses, but fail to commend themselves for their team's victories. Happy people view their abilities as relatively more malleable than fixed, so that a peer's exceptional performance represents not a threat, but an incentive. Happy individuals use social comparison information sparingly. They don't do social comparing in order to determine their well-being or self-esteem. So what do we know about happy people? Some traits, extroversion seems to be a trait there. I'm not sure if it's extroversion. That question's a good one. Does extroversion cause happiness because of more social contacts? Or does happiness produce that outgoing behavior? Self-esteem, accepting yourself, a sense of personal control, hardiness, optimism. Haley, how would you tend to look at these kinds of things? As more internal?
Sorry.
Whoops. I didn't mean to call on you.
Oh, good point. Just raising the question.
But I mean, are these more getting at what you were talking about?
Yeah, I mean, like, yeah, essentially.
Let me.
I mean, extroversion, maybe not traits in that sense, but like, yeah, self-esteem and locus of control, optimism, that sort of thing.
Right. People who can name several intimate friends with whom they share their intimate concerns freely are healthier, less likely to die prematurely, and happier than people who have few or no such friends. So being able to have intimate relationships is pretty important in this happiness issue. Um, it it would seem. If the goal of society is to raise the daily enjoyment of its citizens, it is important to devise ways to increase its relational wealth, social support, social networks. Again, some of the studies of aging and people who are old but happy, there's a lot of social engagement going on. 3 out of 4 married people say their spouse is their best friend, and 4 out of 5 say they would marry the same person again. Married adults are more likely than never married adults to say they're very happy. So I guess it's happiness is happy people are more appealing, by the way, as potential marriage partners and more likely to marry. So getting married is maybe also for longevity and happiness. So this is in support of marriage. Here's another interesting thought. Experiential purchases. Money spent on doing things tends to provide more enduring happiness than material purchases. Experiences tend to produce more enduring satisfaction than do possessions. Um, Experiential purchases tend to make people happier because they evoke fewer comparisons and etc. And people waiting for experiences, anticipation of an experience is much higher than anticipation of getting some kind of a material good. Um, and then here's another really interesting concept. It's called the flow of happy people. When work is a pleasure, life is a joy. When work is a duty, life is slavery. For many people, work provides personal identity, helps define who we are, and offers a network of relationships. And also, it adds meaningfulness potentially. So sometimes work is not satisfying, overwhelmed or underwhelmed. This, I'm not even going to try and pronounce his name, but he talks about the optimal state in work is flow. And basically, to be in flow is to be unself-consciously absorbed. You get so caught up in your activities that the mind does not wander. You become oblivious to your surrounding and time flies. Anyone ever experienced that in work? I know in recreation we may experience this. Happy people tend to have a lot more experiences of being in the flow. Happiness comes not from mindless passivity, but from engagement and mindful challenge. Whether at work or at leisure, people enjoy themselves more when absorbed in the flow of the activity. Involvement, engaging with your environment or yourself tends to be a major source of happiness. So a couple summaries, being able to have close, intimate relationships, being able to be in control or committed to what you're doing, having a social support and a network, being in the flow. All these seem to me to be related quite a bit to happiness from the research and things I've looked at and my own experience. So that's my summary on happiness. I thought you might like to hear some thoughts on that. All right, I'm done. Any thoughts people have on what they just heard?
Professor, can you hear me?
Yes, I'm looking at the chats too.
Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to make just a quick statement about happiness. A song that came to mind was a song from the Rolling Stones, "I Can't Get No," and I just satisfaction, and I just thought of all the stars that a lot of us would take a look at their lives and think that they have everything, and we wish we could change places with them. Stars like Robin Williams and other stars that committed suicide. And it's just, to me, I just think it's pretty ironic how they, from our perspective, they have everything, but they still felt compelled to do what they did. So I feel like you were saying, happiness doesn't necessarily come from having what from some people's perspective think everything, but for some of us, the struggle of just having close relationships with some of the other things that we had
I'm losing part of it, Stephen.
Sorry.
I'm losing.
Sorry, I'm in the library. I was trying to be quiet and talking to my perspective things.
Thanks. I've just lost you, but I picked up on what some of the things. I think some people checked out. Anyone else? All right, everyone. I think we just end up by saying, I know some of you are, the grades are due by next Monday, 18th, 19th. If you're not done with everything, it's no big deal. If you're not done with the course, I'll put an I grade in for you, and you can finish it, and I will change grades. If you're still going to do the optional A paper and want to do it a little later after the term ends, that's fine too. I will give you whatever grade you have by the 18th or 19th. And then, as I said, I have the ability to make changes in your grades up until May. All right. Any questions? Any thoughts?
Yeah, I have one final thought. You know what I think would be a cool contribution to this, I don't know, topic or slideshow would be some of the recent research on mindfulness, because it's such a cool up and coming field that I think is relevant and it's awesome.
Haley, I couldn't agree with you more. As a matter of fact, I'm going through some mindfulness training right now. And
that's awesome.
And
MBSR or
some of the dialectical behavioral stuff.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
I couldn't agree with you more. So maybe you'll see more of that. in my future classes, but you won't be here. But I would encourage all of you, what Haley says, to take a look at this mindfulness and what she's talking about. I really think there's a lot to this. It's being done quite a bit, more and more in business, police departments, you name it. All right, anything else? Well, have a good holiday season, everyone. I've enjoyed working with you. If there's anything I can ever do to help you in the future, you have my email address and phone number. So good luck with the rest of your academic and professional careers. And good night.
Thank you. Bye, everyone. Happy holidays.
Bye-bye.
Happy holidays. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Have a-
Same to everyone.